Welcome Stanley Swan at the Cicero Library. I'm Sue Hansen, and we're welcoming the legacy writers to hear about Stanley from Newark, New York. I know there's a Newark Valley.
Yeah, Newark, New York. I spent a lot of years in Wayne County. Yeah.
He is I'm not sure if you're still in the world of mortician, funeral director, or retired.
I retired about 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
Yeah.
And now writing.
Now writing.
Full speed.
Yeah.
And your works are the Undertakings of an Undertaker.
Yep. Undertakings of an Undertaker, published in 2015. Memoir book, and then in 2019, fictional short story tales Unleashed in 2019, and working on a third book, a novel, but that's a lot of work.
I write short snippets and short stories, and I'm part of a group in Whitesboro, New York that does everything online.
Yeah, I found out when I go out to speak in different groups, people like short stories. Novels are great, but people love short story books. That seems to be kind of what people like, because they can put them in their purse or their back pocket and have fun with them. So,
well, welcome, and I'll let you, if you have an agenda or not, talk about what your writing experiences have been with all of the experiences of being a funeral director.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I do when I go out to speak to a library group or a seniors group, and I always go back to the first book, Undertakings, because after 35 years in the business, the first thing I always tell people is, don't wait for someone else to make your arrangements. Do them yourself. And then you know exactly what you want for yourself. And there'll be no questions if you should have an untimely passing or whatever. So that's the message I always give when I go out to group or virtual or whatever, is if you don't have arrangements, make some arrangements. If you don't know a funeral director, find a funeral director. Most funeral directors, I don't know a funeral director that charges to have a consultation to talk with someone about what they want. I'm a kind of old school. I think everybody should have what they want. They want to be cremated, fine. If they want to be buried somewhere else out in the country somewhere, they should have that. But that's always been a priority for me, is to make sure that you speak to someone about what you want for yourself. I found that very important. So I always stress that when I do a speech to some group, or I do a lot of, not this year, but before, a lot of library groups and seniors groups. It's kind of odd to have a funeral director go out and speak. Most people I found over the years have a lot of questions about the funeral business, but they never knew anybody they could ask. So there's usually people in the audience who go, "Ooh, Mr. Swan, I have a question about this or that." So you get some interesting questions. But and then I started writing years ago the first book, Undertakings, and that's some serious business in there, and some lighthearted stories as well. It's not all gloom and doom. There's some lighthearted stories in the book. Stories in the book about I was a member of a national recovery group years ago, and did recovery work following 9/11. Spent 2 weeks in New York City on Staten Island, and then a few years later went to Mississippi following Hurricane Katrina, and did 10 days of recovery work there. So they're pretty riveting chapters in that book. But as I say, there's some lighter stories to offset it. So it's a good book.
I think my favorite thing from reading your bio was that well, I mean, I don't know how, it's never lighthearted when you're dealing with what you're dealing with, but some folks who jumped the gun and went directly they passed go and went directly to the morgue.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And how is that lighthearted? I don't know, but it can be.
Yeah, every family deals on an average of one death per 15 to 20 years in a family. Every family deals with a death. And as I said in the offset a minute ago, I always like people to find out ahead of time about what the choices are. it's very hard to make good choices at the time of death because I've dealt with families over the years that were just totally encapsulated in grief and didn't know where to start. And it's hard to make good financial decisions too at the time of death. So I always tell people, find a funeral director ahead of time, find out all the options. There's so many more options now than there were 10 or 15 years ago. And get a plan set for yourself. That's the important thing. Put it on paper and put it with someone where they know what you want. Yeah.
I agree.
There
So
were
are
a lot
there
of,
light tales that you can, I think we're frozen here.
pardon me?
Sorry about that.
My screen froze up here. There we go. We're back.
I was looking for an example.
Well, the lighthearted story. Yeah. There's one chapter in the book about, I chuckle when I think about it. A family and a member pass away, and I met with them, and he was going to be cremated, and he had recently put a gold tooth in his mouth, and family said he spent like $1,400 on this gold tooth, and wanted to know if I could remove that. They didn't want it cremated or that kind of money thrown away. So the funeral directors aren't really licensed to do that. So I called a number of people in the dental business in the area where I was working at the time, and they asked me, "You want us to do what?" And they said, no, they wouldn't do that. They explained that during the cremation process that dental gold actually is kind of like goes to nothing. And so I went back and talked to the family, and they decided to go ahead and cremate with the man with his gold tooth. But there are people who ask you some pretty interesting questions over the years. In 30 plus years, I had a lot of odd, unusual questions and requests. And if it's legal in New York State, a funeral director will try to give the family what they want if it's entirely legal. But there are a few things that are a little off the wall, as I would say, kind of unusual, that are hard to meet their prospects of what they'd like to have done.
And there's the story of the apparition.
I was filling in for another funeral director in Wellsville, New York, which was down the road from Andover, where I owned our funeral. And he was away one weekend, and I was down there doing calling hours for him one afternoon, and a lady came in, signed the register book, went into the viewing room, came back out. She says something's going on in the viewing room where the casket is. She says the flowers are moving around and the lights moving around. And I went right in, and I looked around. Everything was very quiet, very still. And as she sat down, was still pretty flustered about it. So I went back out to my position at the front door. And short time later, someone came in and said, "Did you feel the earthquake? The earth tremor?" I said, "No." I said, "That would explain the lady in the front room who just came out a short time ago and said things were moving around." So I went back in and explained to her what was going on. And it was a mild quake, but it was enough to shake her up, literally.
That provides quite the story.
Yeah, there's quite a few stories in the book that are lighthearted, because the publisher in California, Bookstand Publishing, he wanted to do the book, but he didn't want it to be total serious because it's a heavy subject for people, you know. So we inserted a lot of lighthearted stories into the book. There's a story about a beagle running down through church at a very solemn moment, and someone grabbing the beagle up so he wouldn't disrupt the service. So I think it's a well-balanced book because it's not all serious stuff.
Are there times, I mean, it sounds like you've done a lot of somewhat counsel families. Can you speak more about?
Yeah, people, especially if it's a traumatic death in the family, people live with that for years down the road. And I've dealt with a lot of young trauma death, young people, car accidents, drugs, everything, and those families have the hardest time working through the death process. So, and there are families that I served. There's one family I served back in the late 80s whose young son was killed by a truck in the road. And I'm still talking to that mother 30 years later. She still is in contact with me, just because I was one of the last persons to be involved with her son. So we kind of have this kind of a macabre relationship, but it is such, and so it's hard for people to work through those trauma deaths. So, and funeral directors, whether they work in a small town or in a city, have a very special relationship with their clientele, very special, and it's all done in private, and it's next to being a relationship, I think, with someone's minister, to have a relationship with your funeral director. And that's why I always tell people ahead of time, find a funeral director ahead of time, knock on their door, get to know them ahead of time, so that if you have a death in your family, you're not talking to a stranger, because it's hard to talk about what's going on in your family with a strange person. A lot of people have taken that advice over the years, and now they're a funeral director, they have a family doctor, they have a family veterinarian, they have a family accountant, a tax man. You should have a family funeral director as well. As I say, once every 15 to 20 years, a family has a death. So it's important to know someone ahead of time.
I think about the Stan, what is the education that you would, the background education and experience that you've had, or?
Yeah, now it's, when I was in mortuary school, it was 2 years, you had that 2 years of college in any related field. It could be any field. And mortuary school was then a year and a half, and then you had to take your national board exams and state board exams. I think now New York State's bumped it up. I think you can still do it in about 3 years, but most colleges now are offering a four-year term in mortuary science. The school I was at in Syracuse, Simmons School of Mortuary Service, they were there 100+ years. They've since gone out of business since I've been in the business, so they are now gone. But there are, I think, 2 or 3 mortuary colleges in New York State that still offer a mortuary program. In fact, I know one gal who did a total mortuary program online, and which is kind of unusual. I'm not sure how he handled the anatomy part and the embalming instruction online, but she did her total education online with her college and was just licensed in the last 30 days. So she didn't actually have to physically go somewhere to go to school. Yeah.
So I'm looking at a chat. My grandmother used to rent rooms regularly to the students at the school. That's one of, not sure.
At Simmons, yeah. Simmons was a great school, and there were a lot of people right around Simmons School in Syracuse that did as she did, actually rented rooms to kids, young kids. I call them kids. I was 30 when I went back to become a funeral director. Most of the people in my class were age 18 or 19. I was the old guy in the class. Wow. Okay. When she passed, one of her young men actually prepared her. Boy, yeah, what goes around comes around, Yeah, it's interesting.
Now, Simmons, was that also like a business college, or?
No, they were strictly mortuary. It was Simmons
Okay.
School of Mortuary Science, and I can't even remember the street that it was on, but they were there. They trained the majority of the funeral directors in New York State were trained at Simmons School, and went out and did their residency program. It's a year residency after you finish this school program, do your residency, and then you take your board exams and get your license. So a lot of people were trained at Simmons over the years. I still talk to a lot of them that are out there. Yeah.
Now, I guess that's another question. It's unusual that you write. Are there any other writers out there who write about what you write?
There are. I was surprised to see online, because my book's on both Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and if you go and just do a search on Amazon, there are several people who have written books about being in the funeral business. I'm probably one of, I think there's probably another 8, 9, or 10, 12 books out there. that are probably actually memoir oriented like mine, that actually speak of the actual experiences that they had. Naturally, when you write a memoir book, and I was in a small town, I mean, if you have an experience that you're talking about in that particular chapter, you have to change the names to protect the innocent, as they say, because all the things are private. But I was in a small town, Andover, with my funeral home, and some of the stories I've written about in there, people have contacted me and said, I think that story was about my family. It sounded very,
Wow.
it sounded very familiar to them, what it was all going to, anytime you write about the funeral business, it has to be done in good taste. As this basically, you have to change the names and sometimes the circumstances, But I've made a lot of great friends in the funeral business. I have befriended a funeral director in England whose name is Peter Abraham. He has a funeral home in Bristol, England. And he and I chat and do email, and he has furthered my book a great deal in Great Britain. So I've got a good read in the UK, and I hear from people over there, which is kind of interesting. The internet has totally changed everything.
Is the practice much different? I've got that question in Britain.
To some degree. I'm not totally familiar with everything that they do there. Their traditions are a little more stoic, I guess you would say, than ours, but they pretty much do the same. May embalm most of the time. I think their burial rate is a lot higher than their cremation rate. We're doing a lot of cremation in this country. Over 60% now in most states in this country is cremated. And I think still they're kind of traditional over there. They like the viewing, the embalming, the family burial in the family cemetery. Church services are still huge there. Not so much here. People have changed the way we're living today. Everything is so quick now. It's quick, and it's because of people's obligations to work and family. Back in the 60s, here it was not unusual to have 2 full days of calling hours, maybe a 3rd or 4th day funeral. And you might take 4 or 5 days for the whole funeral process. It's not that way now. Most people maybe have an hour of calling, maybe 2 hours of calling, same day funeral. A lot of people don't want to process to the cemetery. I personally don't like that. I'd like it when families go to a cemetery. To me, that's the final step of saying goodbye to someone who's actually going to a cemetery. A lot of people choose not to do that now. They want to do it all in 1 day or a day and a half, and they have obligations. And families that used to live in one town or within a few miles of each other, that's not the way it is now. People are spread all over the country because they've had to do that because of jobs. So now when you have a death, you might wait 24, 36, 48 hours for family members to get back home for a funeral. And a lot of times people won't come. Most funeral homes now around the country are offering what we're doing today, Zoom services, where they have a website, you can go on and not even go physically to the town or city where the funeral's happening, but actually sign a register book virtually, do the funeral on Zoom or another service, and grieve at home instead of making that trek on an airline or driving a day or two. It's really changed a great deal in the last 15 to 20 years. The cremation is the big thing now.
I guess formally a veteran I don't know if you've had any veterans, and assuming that's possible, that it would be, a more of not a civil service, but a military service.
Yeah, military funerals are very, very hourly. There's a lot of time involved with putting together military service, from the time of death, notification of the family, military educate actually goes to the family, meets with the family, makes the arrangements, and then they pretty much do everything on a military death, and then let the funeral director know what's going to happen. And then they help the funeral director make the obituary, make all the arrangements for transporting the body to an airport, getting it back to the funeral home. Then they actually send military people to help with the funeral. They do a marvelous job. I've had quite a few military funerals over the years, and they're breathtaking. They are to be part of.
Well, I guess the question now remains is that if anyone has any questions besides the chat, I don't know if Tom, if you want to unmute yourself. Okay.
I hope you found it informative.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, very, but I've got no questions at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of people, when I go out, they have a lot of questions about embalming. Is it required? Do you have to have a casket? Do you have to have a vault?
I went through this 5 years ago with my mother.
Yes.
And she had the foresight 2 years before she died.
Good for her.
Call me in, hook up with the funeral director, get everything prepaid, get everything arranged.
Yeah.
I took brochures to her, and she actually picked out her casket.
Yeah.
Right. And everything was ready. And when the time came, I was here in North Syracuse. She was in Wheatfield, New York.
Uh-huh.
And they said, "What do we do?" I said, "Call this number."
Yeah.
And by the time I got there the next morning after she died, everything had moved on.
Everything.
Funeral director had it under control.
Yeah.
And I had even pre-written the obit.
Okay.
And he had it. I emailed it to him, filled in the blanks, and emailed it to him the morning before I left to go pick up the loose ends, so to speak.
Well, sorry.
It was so smooth.
Yeah, I'm sorry about your mom, but you echo what I said.
She was pushing 104. Wow. She had a good long life.
Yeah. But you could second what I said before. It's so important to do it ahead of time. And
yes.
Look at the aggravation and the grief. It saved the family.
30 years before that was my dad, and we scrambled.
Yeah.
I remembered that one, and so did she. So yeah, I understand.
It's difficult to make decisions when someone dies, so it's just good to have it done ahead of time.
Yeah. Last week ago, not this past Saturday, a week ago Saturday, we were in Lyons for somebody who passed in the family.
I know that town well, Lyons, yeah.
Yeah.
Home of the Bayheim Funeral Home.
This was a
there.
Kessler?
Yeah.
K something.
Yeah, I know the town well.
Yeah, I just GPS took me there, and we paid our respects and took care of stuff.
I'm glad things went well for you.
Oh yeah, always.
It's good. And you will do the same thing for your family. When the time comes. And
I'll be first. Excuse me, I'll be first.
And something after that, maybe I ought to start thinking about this. And it comes in time.
My wife's got it under control.
Good for her.
Same. It's never too late is what you're saying.
Never too early.
Or I mean,
do it as soon as possible. Yes.
But
take care of arrangements.
There's just so many options now. Years ago there were so few options, but now you can view a body before it's cremated. You can do embalming or not embalming. You can have a funeral and then cremation. I mean, you can rent a casket now. People aren't aware you can do that. I mean, there's so many more options that there were just a few years ago. So whatever you can think of, it's probably possible, probably legal in the state of New York. If you just pick up the phone and ask a funeral director, and most of them will tell you straight out if you can do it or not. Most guys give real good advice. I've never met a funeral director that's maybe been what I would say a little sketchy. There's a few out there, I'm sure, but most people are on the up and up, and it's only good business for them to give good answers and to give good service.
Wow.
If someone out there's not doing good service or giving right answers, they're not going to be in business, Paul. They're gonna go by the by. So ask ahead of time. That's my motto. And you sounded like you did the right thing. So your mom did a good job.
So my process was talking about, Stanley, is short stories and writing little
Yeah,
parts.
yeah.
Is that kind of how you approach when you're writing? You think of a situation?
Yeah. On the second book, yeah, Tales Unleashed, I've always been lucky that I could just be walking out on a country road somewhere and get an idea for a story. And I would come back and, sit down and write a story. And that's how there's 26 stories in Tales Unleashed, all fiction. Uh, but it's funny how you'll come up with an idea for a story. You'll do something and say, you'll have some circumstance in your daily or weekly routine that would say, gee, that might make a good story if I embellish it with this or that. So you just go down and sit and write. And when I do write, I only write for maybe 20, 30 minutes, then I stop and I put it back away for about a day or two. Then I go back to it and then I fix everything that I did before or add to it. Or sometimes in the middle of the night, I'll say, there's another way I want to end that story. So yeah, writing is a process, at least for me. I know people, you see people on television who write these novels every 30 days and they have a new book. I don't know how they do it, because to sit down and just pound a typewriter or a word processor for hours and days at a time, I could not do that. I think everybody that writes have to investigate their own style. What's the easiest for them? But writing is a lot of fun. I've got 46,000 words down on the novel. That's about an Undertaker in the Old West. Naturally, what else would I write about? And I'm hoping that's going to be finished this year, but maybe not. Might be next year. But see what the good Lord has in mind for me. We'll go from there. But a lot of people who've always said they want to write and actually do it. If I tell people, just buy a journal. You don't have to have a word processor. I've got a couple of older people I know now that they used to serve in their family years ago. And I say, buy a journal, take pen and paper, and just start making notes about things that you've been interested in, things that you've done, challenges that you've had. And before long, you might have a book to publish. And people like memoir books. I found that out. They're very, very good sellers. People like to hear about other people's lives, what they did, the ups, the downs,
We've discussed this in our writing group,
Right.
and we found out that the truth of life is a lot stranger than the fiction you might be writing. Yeah, I often have to stop them and say, this is true. This actually happened.
Yeah.
So, it all depends on where you're coming from and what kind of life you might have led too.
Exactly.
Mine was kind of weird. So
yeah. I say in fact, I think the last chapter in Undertaking says something to the line that every life has a story to tell. Everyone does, because every life is different. Their reactions, their family, everything they did. So it's fun just to write it down.
It's funny you should say that too, because I keep saying is, some in the group will say, I don't know what to write about. I said, oh, come on now.
Yeah.
I'm a photographer. All
Okay.
I have to do is go back through a pile of pictures and I go story, 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 and then put them aside. And if they group together, much
Exactly.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love your profession. I used to do a lot of outdoor photography too. And I still get ideas from some of the pictures I've taken over the years, whether it's an old sugar shack out in the woods or an old barn or whatever.
Let me add the words Navy photographer to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not looking forward to, but I expect a military funeral.
Good for you.
Well,
you deserve it. Thanks for your service.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So the other question is, the marketing. It looks like word of mouth is what got it overseas. Your first book.
Yeah, the marketing, I was lucky. Bookstand Publishing, who did both of my books, they're in California, Morgan Hills, California. They did most of the marketing. It's all, Amazon and Barnes and Noble. But I feel that if you're an author, you've got to go out and promote the book. You've got to promote the book. there's I think I read 1 million or 2 million books written a year. So in order for your book to do well, you have to promote it. So I promote it all the time. I have little reader cards, business cards. I leave everywhere I go with my blog address on there, and people go to my blog and look at my books. As I say at the beginning, I do a lot of presentations at libraries, at seniors groups, church groups. People want to know about the funeral business. Some people, raise their hand, never asked this question. But yeah, you have to be a big marketer. But it's been a lot easier now than it was years ago because we have the internet. I mean, it's worldwide now. The people that can tap into what you're doing. And this broadcast itself, after it's put out there, it's going to bring people into the story of the things that I did. So it's marketing's a tough. I never had a degree in marketing, but if you have a degree in marketing, I'm sure it'd be most helpful if you're an author. Yeah.
I think libraries have a similar situation. Is there so many places that are, so many schedules going on and intertwining, that libraries need a special spot in someone's day. And when we went to the pandemic, the appointments, it became so difficult. And now suddenly when folks realize they no longer have to do an appointment, they can just walk right in.
Yeah.
The word of mouth we've put every word out with publications and media, and New York State is opening up now. Folks are still aligning what they know from Fox News or whatever mainstream news to get your word out on a blog, or you've got to be your own speaker.
I've had my blog a couple, 3 years. I promoted on Facebook and linked and some of these other places, but still, again, there's so many out there. There's millions of places to go to. So you really have to work at it earnestly if you want to create traffic on your site. So yeah, so I was giving my blog out. I could do that very quickly for people. It's my undertakings, plural, myundertakings.blogspot.com. myundertakings.blogspot.com.
I have a blog.
That's my blog, and they can go on and actually open. I do a lot of other stories telling on my blog, and they can open both of my books and read some of the chapters in the book without purchasing the book. I'm not a big seller. If I put the product out there and people look at it and they're interested in it, they're going to purchase it. If they're not, that's fine too. But I offer a lot of reading on my blog for people that they don't have to buy.
I guess there's another question from, I believe it's Stephanie. I hope I have her name right. Have you made your own arrangements?
Yes, I have. And it's odd because my folks who've been both deceased about 19 to 20 years ago, they had never made their own arrangements, but I finally talked them into it because they were talking about it and said, well, your son's a funeral director, you think about making your own arrangements. So they did years ago ahead of time. Bought graves, stone, made arrangements, put money aside. So, and after they did it, my mom said, that was the best thing I ever did. You should have talked us into it sooner. But yeah, I've done my own stuff. Mine's done. So if because I'm on the road quite a bit, so if I get hit by a Mack truck, the old saying is, somebody will know what to do with me when it's done. So it just makes sense. And let people know that you've got those arrangements made. Put them in
your will. Yeah.
I always caution not to put them in a will. I'll tell you why. Sometimes it might be weeks or days before a will is looked at. And by then a funeral may have already passed. So I tell when they make funeral arrangements, make several copies of it, have it notarized, preferably in your own handwriting. Anybody could sit down at the typewriter and make any kind of arrangements out on the typewriter, preferably in your own writing. Have it witnessed with a notary and dated, and leave several copies with several family members.
The director that I worked with for my mother, there was a completely separate package.
Yes.
That had nothing to do with the will at all.
Exactly.
Because it's
totally
different. The will could go on for years.
Yeah, it could. Yeah.
So,
yeah. So most funeral homes now have pre-need arrangement forms
Yep.
to send home with you, tell you what the costs are,
Yep. He had a
what
check.
steps to do. Boom, 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 boom. You can go online now.
He actually had a checklist, and I was able to go down and make sure I had everything in
Yes.
hand
Yeah.
and or to him ahead of time.
But there's a lot there, from birth certificates to what you want done for yourself, whether service, no service, embalming, none, cremation. There's just so much out there. Where are your where's your money kept? Where your banks? Where your banking is?
Oh, that
And
was
you've
under
been through
control.
it, so you know there's just a whole litany of things you need to look at.
Yeah, we had a lot of the good news. We had a lot of that under control because mom had to go into a nursing home near the end.
Yeah.
So my brother and I had all the financial and the house and everything was under control.
Yeah.
But sorry, I got distracted with the flash here. Flash message. But the package for the funeral home was everything we ever needed. And again, once we signed up, prepaid, everything was all set, and he just took it from there and ran.
Yep. And
No,
that's,
it was a no-brainer. I just the family just showed up and paid respects, and that was it.
there's a big weight off the shoulders to have it done.
Mhm.
Have it done ahead of time. Yep. And questions answered ahead of time.
And that she had the cemetery plot had been in the family since 1941, I believe.
Uh-huh.
So mom skipped a generation for
Yeah.
so,
So another suggestion of a book called I'm Dead Now What is a title that includes all kinds of information. It sounds like
There are lots of books out there on the death process. There are lots of them out there. So go on and the internet now is unbelievable because you can go to Google and other places and ask any question and get your answer. So there's just a lot more information out there than people had 10, 20 years ago. So the internet's been a blessing, a curse and a blessing both.
it's hard. Well, I think too, when libraries go through, they want something that's current, and they might go through something and say, oh, this is not up to date, and go out the door, and then you don't replace it.
Right.
So it's always good to check. I also see there's not a whole lot that isn't already out there on grief, dealing with grief.
Yeah.
Do you come across with that or address it? Is that
Yeah,
something
there are
separate?
a lot of funeral homes now. When I did my last 7 years license in Corning with Phillips and Carpenter's Funeral Home in Corning, they actually have a grief counselor on staff that we call in that a family can meet with. A lot of funeral homes have grief counselors, not actually in the building every day, but they're on staff because a lot of people have need down the road. As I said earlier, this one lady that I took care of her son years ago, I'm still talking to this lady, and I'm sure she's still talking to other people as well. A lot of people just need to talk. They need to talk to someone, you know. And a lot of people have a much harder time dealing with the grief process, the death process than other people. Some people go through it very quickly, no problems. Other people, I had a lady years ago, her husband was killed in an aircraft, and she said, I think I have a problem. I said, why? She says, I've been still setting the table for my husband every night for the last year. Yeah, she needed professional help. So, and people usually know that amongst themselves. They look at themselves, and if they're not getting on with their lifestyle and progressing where they should be, then they say, well, I really need to speak with someone. So, yeah. So that, yeah, the grief process, it's an important part of the death industry. So there's a lot of people out, again, there are a lot of grief counselors out there that are hooked up with funeral homes who help them with people who have problems. This is difficult.
I guess any lasting questions? I don't have that many more.
Well, you've done a good job. You've been an excellent interviewer.
Oh, thank you. I've had a lot. This is the second time I've had a local New York State author, and the experiences of going outside of New York, and doing the doing the publishing with an online book stand, I believe is what you said was the,
Heinz Book Stand, yeah. I've had really, really good luck with them. I'm very pleased with them. Finding a publisher was the hardest part.
yeah, that was the
Right.
same with the other writer.
It's the hardest part, find a publisher that doesn't want $10,000 to sit down with you. You know, so finding a good publisher and getting people to refer, good referrals. But I've been very, very lucky with my people at Book Stand. So they've had some changes lately. They've got a new gal that just took over, and she's excellent. So they do all the work. They when the books get sold, they take care of filling the orders, and every 3 months I get a check for the royalties, and I can go there once a month and see the sales, so I know what's going on constantly.
So the New York, how about independent stores? Do you reach out yourself, Stan? Or they do all that for you, the reaching out to bookstores?
I do all that myself.
Okay.
Yeah, in the Finger Lakes where I live, in the Steuben County, the Finger Lakes area, I have books in several different counties and bookstores, but I've done that physically. I've actually taken books out and said, would you like to sell my book? And I'll give you this and this for selling each book. So that's the way I've marketed locally in 5, 6, 7, 8 counties. Is pretty much hit the street with a book. It was like the old time guys used to do. But and that it's been a difficult for bookstores too, because online has really put a crunch on bookstores. It really has. So they felt it as well. That's why they like to have authors come in and do readings and advertise that. I did one in Palmyra here a year or two ago at a bookstore, and she does it regularly at her bookstore, has an author come in and will advertise it, and she might have 10, 12, 15 people come in that evening, have refreshments, and have the author there, read some stories. And so it's both author and the bookstore working together. But it's been challenging for them because the internet's changed everything, including their business. So, yeah. But if it's in a bookstore locally, I put it out there. Yeah.
I've been to Friends of the Library. You know, we've asked, a lot of times we'll ask for a donation, and I've done that with a signed copy. I made this error. I bought a signed copy of Grisham's book this past January, I think it was, or even before that.
Yeah.
It's $250 direct.
Yeah.
More than that. Now that was discounted. The Friends have taken on the task. We're going to try to put something together, some books, and I'm thinking I might put that together in a book
Right.
package, this summer, and do a summer
Yeah.
reading prize. And
Yeah.
I'd like to try to include your book in there.
It'd be great.
And hopefully someone will donate it back, or we'll just get another copy, because I don't
There you
see
go.
any copies in the system.
That's
But
right.
that would be a fun thing to do local. And here, by the way, here's this signed copy that
Yeah.
it was Grisham's Camino Wind, and for some reason I overlooked the price. You couldn't get a copy.
I
It
see.
sold out everywhere,
Right.
except for this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you get to that level,
Yeah.
look us up.
All right. All right.
Anyway, it's been nice talking. Anybody else?
Well, it's been great. I appreciate you having me with you today. It's been my pleasure to be on your cast with you, and hopefully I've given out some information that will be helpful.
We'll have to have you in person.
When this is all over, I'd love
Yep.
to come up your way. I do get to Rochester once in a while, done a couple of presentations there, but I haven't been east of there, the Syracuse area, but I'd be thrilled to get that way. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, you take care. Thanks for everyone for
Thanks.
coming.
Thanks.
It's been
Susan.
enjoyable.